It's a pleasure to welcome to our club meeting presentation here on RAC Proposals for Change to ISED Policy on Amateur Radio Call Signs, RIC-9. Please welcome Dave Goodwin, VE3 Kilo Golf.
All right, thank you very much, Brent, and thank you all for having me in this evening. I think it was Jerry's initiative to have me come, so I'm pleased to be back. I'm sort of regretting that I'm so far away. Anyway, so my current role, I'm sit on the RAC executive as the regulatory affairs officer, and that means I deal with a lot of regulatory issues, things dealing with ISED policy, anything when it comes to amateur radio and dealing with the government. That's sort of my bailiwick. So what I'm going to be doing this evening is presenting to you the proposals that RAC has presented on your behalf to ISED to change and update the policy governing amateur radio call signs in Canada. So, there we go. So a little bit of historical background. The current policy, RIC-9, was first written in the late 1990s. And it has had a few small modifications since that time, most recently in about 2005. At the April meeting, the April formal meeting between RAC and ISED on regulatory issues, it's called CARIB, the Canadian Amateur Radio Advisory Board, we informed ISED that we intended to come up with recommendations for changes to RIC-9 because we felt RIC-9, this policy document, was due for an update. So what followed from that is we created a survey. Many of you may have participated in this. It was an online survey run off the RAC website where we asked you a series of questions, about 53 questions or 55 questions in total, covering a number of different aspects of the policy. We also stuck a few other questions in there that weren't directly related to the policy, but we thought were worthwhile raising anyway. So the survey went on during August and September. In October of 2022, we produced the raw data, made the raw data available, and we produced an analysis of the results from somebody who's a radio amateur from the US who's a university professor in statistical methods and in sociology. So we actually had 2,300 radio amateurs from across Canada participate in this survey. So it's quite a large sample of our total amateur population. So October 2022, we published the results. In March of 2023, after a bit of deliberation and debate, the board of RAC passed the first of two resolutions outlining RAC's policy and our RAC's request to ISED. We did the second resolution dealing with some extraneous issues in May of 2023, and finally in June of 2023, we presented this to ISED. So I was the one who presented to ISED at the following CARIB meeting. Does anybody have any questions, comments so far about the process that we've gone through in history here?
Yes, you're saying that 2,300 responses represents 3% of the ham radio population in Canada, is that it?
That's correct. Yeah, we have about 70,000 hams in Canada. You may have seen one of my columns in TCA where it sort of broke down a census of amateur radio in Canada. So 2,300 is about 3% of the total amateur population.
Thank you, Dave. So
there are many aspects of call sign policy. It's a little bit more complicated than you might think at first blush. There are a number of things that the current policy does very well. It protects our existing call area system very well. We all have a pretty good knowledge that when you hear of E9, they're in New Brunswick. When you hear of E5, they're in Saskatchewan, and so on. That call area system is something that has been protected very well, and I think is generally popular. The current policy also provides a very quick means to issue new call signs to new amateurs. So I am an accredited examiner. I've actually taken somebody from being an unlicensed person or an uncertified person, beginning their exam, to actually holding a call sign in as fast as 2 hours. Somebody, they did the exam, we marked the exam, I reported the results, they had an interaction with ISED and got a call sign, all within 2 hours. Amazing. We have a remarkably efficient system, probably the envy of the world. I don't think anybody else can do that. We have a number of useful utilities to select available call signs. That doesn't exist in most countries. We have very clear rules, and they are uniformly applied by people at the Amateur Radio Service Center in Sault Ste. Marie. They do so with, they follow the rules exactly. We have easy access to special event station call signs. We have easy access to special prefixes. We have good qualified access to 2x1 calls for contests. So generally speaking, there are some real strengths in the current policy and the way it works. However, there are some significant deficits to the current policy. It does not detect deceased amateurs. It does not detect amateurs who've left the hobby and who have no longer have any interest in the hobby. The current policy makes two-letter call signs a little too available. That contributes to the scarcity in some provinces. For people who move around the country, there's a forced break in continuity that, I cite myself as an example. I've lived in 5 different provinces. I've held over 10 Canadian different call signs because of all those moves. I've willingly accepted that change of identity every time, but that doesn't necessarily sit well with anybody. And there is a minority but significant demand for portability of call signs. So trying to find a way of handling that has been one of the challenges of this policy. Our current practice when it comes to special event station call signs is at variance with the way the ITU regulations on amateur radio call signs go, and this requires a minor fix. We also have a forced break in continuity for people who obtain 2x1 call signs to use in contests. That's one of the reasons why that particular aspect of the policy is not particularly popular. Just sort of on a global statement here, I think when it comes to the call signs that are available to amateurs in Canada, what we have is a very poorly allocated resource. The ITU has given Canada 24 blocks of call signs, if you will, 24 different prefixes that the government of Canada can use to make radio station call signs. The format of an amateur radio call sign is very specific. It's 2 characters, in the case of Canada, 2 characters, followed by a numeral, followed by a group of letters. That's the basic ITU requirement. And in Canada's case, we have 24 possible prefixes from which we can create amateur radio call signs that fit the ITU format. So of the 24 blocks of call signs, we're using 4 for regular call signs. So the VA, VE, VO, and VY prefixes, those are all blocks of call signs allocated to Canada. Those are the blocks we're using for regular issue amateur call signs. We're also using those same blocks for special event station call signs. And we have another further 4 blocks, 4 distinct prefixes that we're using for special event stations only. And we have a further 16 prefixes that we are using for special prefixes. And we have one prefix that's used strictly for Government of Canada stations, primarily ISED stations. Of the currently authorized 5 ISED stations holding VY-9 call signs, 0 are active. 0 have a working station. So what we have here is really a pretty poorly allocated resource. As well, we have a number of prefixes and potential call sign series that are completely inaccessible to Canadian amateurs because of the way the current policy works. So that's the current situation. What we're proposing is that of the 24 Canadian blocks, we reorganize things. We still maintain the current VA, VE, VO, and VY call sign blocks. We're proposing no change there. We're proposing to set aside 2 distinct prefixes strictly for special event stations, and to do so in a way that conforms with the ITU regulations. We want to as well assign 4 other prefixes for special prefix operations and also for future planning. And we want to be able to allocate 18 of the 24 blocks specifically for regular issue Canadian amateur radio call signs. So in so doing, we want to protect the current call areas. We want to make full use of the numerals associated with the VO and the VY prefixes. We want to provide an inducement to people to upgrade their group qualifications and skills. And we want to create a system where there is a possibility of mobility for people who want that mobility. So finding a way of balancing all this stuff it's a tricky challenge, but I think we've come up with a pretty good policy, or a pretty good series of recommendations to do that. Now, I'm always reluctant to make any comparison to the United States. Frankly, it's a crazy place. They do strange things down there, but once in a while they get something a little bit right. And I think, on balance, with some significant reservations, the Americans may have done a pretty good thing in the way that they've handled it, and there are other countries that have done similar sorts of things. So again, in Canada, we have 24 blocks of call signs. The United States has 90 blocks of call signs. We use 4 for regular call signs plus some special events. What they've done is they've created a series of unique call signs just for special event stations in that very short format, so-called 1x1 format, like K1A or W0Z. What we want to do is, under the current system, we have 4 for special event stations only, 16 for special prefixes, 1 for government stations, and so on, as I've already described. The US system has no provision for special prefixes. They're using all 90 of the US blocks for regular call signs. They have over 750,000 amateurs, but they have room in their system for 10 million possible call signs. So they've got a system that sort of works for them, although, say, there are some significant reservations we should have about it. Generally speaking, if I would describe our system generally, is that we are making efficient and good use of 22% of what Canada's been allocated. We are using 2/3 of all the possible prefixes that Canada has for special events and special prefixes. And I think that strikes me as a bit of the tail wagging the dog. Special events and special prefixes are nice and good and they're fun, but to allocate 2/3 of this resource to that seems a little unbalanced to me. As well, we have 29 potential Canadian prefixes out of 240, that's 12%, that are basically completely wasted. They're inaccessible. They cannot be used by amateurs for any purpose whatsoever. Compare that to the waste in the US system is only about 1.6%. There are only 15 prefixes out of their possible 930 that are inaccessible in their system. So there's, a comparison with our closest neighbor. Again, I'm reluctant to make these comparisons, but sometimes they tell us things that we should know. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the most important elements of what RAC has proposed to ISED. Now, first off is about the expiry date issue. Under our current policy, the call sign that's allocated to you will remain allocated to you until your 125th birthday. Very few of us will ever reach it. In fact, I don't think any Canadian has ever reached the age of 125. What this is really is an example of ISED kicking the can down the road. They didn't know how to, when they went to lifetime certificates and call signs, they didn't quite know how to manage it any other way. So they used the archivist trick of 125 years into the future, and that's as far as the thinking went. The consequence of this is that we have a specter haunting amateur radio, the specter of the ghost hams, of the phantom hams, the dead hams who still have call signs allocated to them. So again, I'll use myself as an example. I'm not dead yet, but I could be tomorrow. I've had a call sign allocated to me. I'm 63 years old. If I'm hit by a bus tomorrow and nobody tells ISED, my call sign will remain allocated to me until the year 2085. That's nuts. It's just, it's ridiculous. This is having a 2-letter call sign, especially in Ontario where I live, it's a very precious resource, and it's really just being wasted. So there are a number of situations where we have amateurs who passed away. ISED's never been informed, at least not informed authoritatively, and the call sign remains allocated to those people until 125 years passes. It's an awful situation. So what we propose is that we continue to have a system of lifetime certificates and call signs. However, that we consider the call sign to be registered to the certificate for a period of time. A period of 5 years is what we've proposed. And that in order to renew that registration of a call sign, all you have to do is to log into the ISED website. So each of us can create an account on the ISED website and index it to our certificate and our call signs. And what we're proposing is a very simple transaction where if you log on to the ISED website with your credentials, that every time you do that, your certificate and your call sign are renewed for a further 5 years. I have an example of this from personal experience. I hold a UK call sign, and in the UK, they still call it a license over there. But in the UK, the way it works is every time I log on to the Ofcom website and update my contact information, my license is automatically renewed for a further 5 years. So I want to try and apply that model. So all you would need to do is to log on to the ISED website to renew the registration of your call sign for a further 5 years. If 5 years pass where you've made no contact with the ISED website, then we propose that your call sign be suspended. And during the next year, that gives you a kind of a window of opportunity to recover a call sign in the event that the date slipped and you missed it. After 6 years with no contact, we would want to make the call sign available to reissue. This is a way of keeping the database alive and revitalized. Before the year 2000, we actually had a system of station licenses where we'd have to pay renewal fees every year. Well, we're not going to go back to a system of station licenses for sure. However, that did do a great job of allowing call signs to naturally expire when people lost interest, when people passed away, when they failed to maintain contact information with ISED. That happened on a regular basis. So call signs became available every year as people failed to renew. So we're proposing something a little bit like that, but a little simpler, a little more straightforward. So the obligation would be on the amateur to renew the registration of their call sign, and it should be an online process. We also propose that for those perhaps 75 years or older, that they could optionally renew by paper, and that's on the supposition that people above 75 may be a little less conversant with using the web, but that may be a false assumption as well. That's part of our proposal. Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything I've said so far?
So people who forget to sign into ISED to do that could really fall through the cracks and lose their call sign.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. It's very possible. I tell you, I have an analogous situation. I moved to Ontario a couple of years ago, and what they did in Ontario here for your license plates is they went to a system where there are no license plate fees anymore. All you have to do is renew online your license plate, and you have to do it at least once every 2 years. And if I fail to renew my license plate and a cop pulls me over, I could be fined for not having my car license in current registration. So, the obligation is on me as the individual to make sure that I'm up to date with the issuing authority. So that's the analogous situation. But yes, the obligation would be on the amateur to renew, and if it slips your mind, well, you're running a risk. I should explain as well, what you're going to see in the next several slides is you're going to see the core content on the left in larger print. What you see on the right is the actual text of the resolution that was passed at the RAC board meeting in either March or May of this year. All right. So,
sorry, Dave.
Yes.
So far, these are just proposals. They haven't been incorporated yet with ISED.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on the implementation with ISED right now, and we can certainly get into some of the technicalities and problems that they face doing this. Say it's our proposal, not sure what they're going to implement, or how, or if they're going to implement anything. All right. So the next proposal we made shouldn't be very controversial. We proposed to add space stations, space operations to the array of call signs that can be issued VE0 call signs. VE0 is a prefix that has been reserved for ships at sea, for people conducting operations outside Canadian territorial waters. It's optionally available if you have a boat, if you're going to be on a ship, you can get a VE0 call sign for that purpose. We're proposing simply to add space stations, satellites, operations for the International Space Station, that sort of thing. Any Canadian activity in space, basically, a radio amateur in space should be able to get a VE0 call sign. So it's a pretty small addition. We're also suggesting some clarification to some of the wording, because some of the wording is rather poorly done in RIC-9. Any questions about this? All right. Now, one of the things that happens right now, if in the event that you surrender a call sign, if you decide to voluntarily give up a call sign, maybe you've moved, maybe you've changed your call sign, you don't want the old one. When you surrender a call sign, when you tell ISED, I no longer want this call sign, that call sign becomes immediately available for reissue. So we're proposing is to create a 1-year cooling off period, a 1-year period. If you decide to give up a call sign, there'd be a 1-year period in which you would have the option of getting it back, but only after 1 year would it be available to be allocated to somebody else. Sometimes people have changes of heart. On two-letter call signs, one of the current issues in at least 3 provinces is what appears to be a desperate shortage of two-letter call signs. A lot of people like to have two-letter call signs. They connote seniority, they connote experience. There are all sorts of reasons for wanting to have a shorter call sign. So under the current rules, all you need in order to acquire a two-letter call sign in most of the country is to have been a ham for 5 years. It doesn't matter what your qualification level is, as long as you hold at least a basic certificate, you can hold a two-letter call sign. And even then, we have exceptions in New Brunswick, in Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon. Anybody can get a two-letter call sign right on their first day in amateur radio. And the general rule has been that until 80% of the two-letter call signs have been issued in any particular call area, that any two-letter call sign would be available to anyone. So New Brunswick has not reached that point. Labrador has certainly not reached that point. The Prince Edward Island and the Territories haven't reached that point. So that the current policy is 5 years of experience, any level of qualification, you can have a two-letter call sign, and of course the time exception is waived for those 6 areas. What we're proposing is to make this more uniform across the country, and to increase the level of experience required and the level of qualification. So we're proposing is that in future issues of two-letter call signs would be available only to individuals who are holders of an advanced certificate and who have held a Canadian certificate for at least 10 years. So basically increasing the seniority qualification from 5 years to 10, and to require the advanced certificate as well. And at the same time, we would abolish the exception for new amateurs in Northwest Territories, New Brunswick, Labrador, Nunavut, Yukon, and Prince Edward Island. Questions about this?
Yes, I do have one, Dave.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to go back. The two-letter call, the proposal sounds great. I guess the question I have is the 10 years. And so if a lot of the policy is adopted and we don't have, most of the call signs are used, then if, I guess in other countries, they may not have a stringent requirement for having been a ham so long before you can get a two-letter call sign. I don't know if it's good or bad. I just note it. Suppose ISED comes up with that and they accept all the recommendations. I presume there would be negotiation about if we would stick with 10 years or 5 years or something like that?
Yes, it really is going to be ISED down to deciding what they want to do. Again, right now the rule is 5 years. We're proposing it be expanded to 10. And in part, this comes from the results of the survey, which indicated a strong sentiment from Canadian amateurs in favor of seniority being a major qualification.
Yes.
And also the level of certificate held by the individual should also be a major qualification. To some extent, this is an echo of the way the policy used to work. It used to be you had to be a ham 10 years. Used to be you had to have advanced certificate. Those are the basic elements of the old policy. It was a little more nuanced and qualified than that, but we have when we changed a 5 year to a 5 year qualification, that actually increased the scarcity of two-letter call signs remarkably in some provinces.
Okay, thanks.
I'm guessing that this is not retroactive. That is, people who now have two-letter with less than 10 years.
No, we will not be coming and raiding your homes and taking away your call signs. There's no intention of doing anything like that whatsoever. No, what you have, you get to keep. But any new issues of call signs would be subject to this policy if it's implemented as we suggest here. So, for instance, right now under the current policy, clubs can't get two-letter call signs, but the Fredericton Club has two two-letter call signs. In fact, there also is a rule that says you can only hold one two-letter call sign. Well, I know of a few people who've held multiple two-letter call signs. At one point, I held two two-letter call signs, but so there's never been a retroactive implementation of any of these things because, frankly, call signs are probably the most emotional issue in amateur radio. Above anything else, this is the thing that will get people bent out of shape more than anything else. Okay. Now, we also, one of the things we tested in the survey was whether there was broad acceptance of the current policy when it came to silent keys. And generally speaking, yes, there's the way it works right now is if a radio amateur passes away and ISED is informed, a member of their immediate family can, within a year of the amateur's passing, be issued that call sign if they're appropriately qualified. And of course, if they live in the right province or territory for the call sign. So this is a kind of a preferred access that members of a family can have to a deceased family member's call sign. So we're proposing to maintain that preferred access to members for family members to obtain the key, the call of a silent key. However, when it comes to having a 2-letter call sign, because they are in such demand, we're proposing that at very least a member of the family must have their advanced certificate to obtain the 2-letter call sign of a recently deceased family member. We would not impose the 10-year qualification. So one of the things that we've noticed, it's come up over and over again, is a radio amateur passes away, the family are distraught, the family are worried, and one of the things they know that was really precious to mom or dad was his or her old call sign, and they'd like that to stay within the family. Nobody else in the family has any interest in ham radio. One of them gets cajoled into at least passing the basics so they can get mom or dad's old call sign. But this is a person who, for all intents and purposes, has no interest in amateur radio, is only doing this out of loyalty to their parent who's just passed away. What we would like to see is somebody who actually has a little bit more of a personal investment in amateur radio. If they're going to acquire a 2-letter call sign, at least pass your advanced. Even if you're a fairly new ham, if you want to acquire mom or dad's 2-letter call sign, at least have your advanced. So we wouldn't impose the 10-year qualification in that circumstance. Any questions, comments about this? Okay. Now, we currently have a policy that allows us to have a special prefix to mark important events. So, for instance, just this year, we had a special prefix to mark the coronation. A couple of years ago, we had a special prefix right across the country to mark the 150th anniversary of Confederation. There have been a whole series of these events, local events, provincial events, national events. They've all been marked with special prefixes where you could substitute the VE or the VA or the VO, VY in the beginning of your call sign with a different Canadian prefix, to mark the celebration. And again, what we saw was an overuse, an overdedication of the Canadian prefixes to these special events. And we also picked up from the survey that there was a substantial agreement with the idea of limiting the number of possible special prefixes to a few. One point of the survey, we asked about one special prefix alternative. Another part of the survey, we asked about 2 special prefix alternatives, and both got about the same kind of response. So what we're proposing is that that special prefixes be available for the VE, VA, VO, and VY call areas, that there only be 2 special prefix alternatives for every regular prefix. So, for instance, we're all the VE9s. The VE9 there would be a possibility of getting authorized for either VF or VG in place of VE in your call sign to mark a special event. So there would only be 2 special prefix alternatives. Right now, there are 4. And similarly, for the VAs, it would be VB or VC, and so on. We'd like to sort of reorganize things when it comes to the VOs and the VYs, because these are historically separate, historically different call areas from the rest of the country. So what we'd like to do is reuse some of the numbers, some of the numerals that are not currently accessible under our current policy. And historically, if you go back before Confederation, there were actually 6 different call areas in Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's now settled down to 2 post-Confederation. So what we're proposing is that there be, say, 2 special prefix alternatives for each Canadian call area. And the current authorization period is a little complicated, but it's 1 month or 2, depending on the extent of the event. We're proposing that the authorization period be extended up to 12 months or the duration of the event, whichever is shorter. So if there's a provincial event that's going to be celebrated with some kind of function around a particular date, that there might be an authorization for a couple of weeks around that date. If there's something that's a year long, like the 150th anniversary of Confederation, perhaps it could be a full year authorization. But we want to see a little bit more flexibility rather than the current rigid 1 or 2 month authorizations. So we propose the authorization period be extended up to 12 months or the duration of the event, whichever is shorter. Now, one of the other things we have to do is, as well, is plan for the future. So currently, the rate of growth in amateur radio in Canada it's been consistently good. Now, there are lots of Chicken Littles out there who will tell you the ham radio is dying. They're wrong. They should be told they're wrong repeatedly. What we have a situation is where amateur radio is growing at a rate approximately twice the rate of growth of the national population. Over the last several decades, Canada's annual population growth rate, with immigration and everything else included, has been about 1% a year. The growth in amateur radio over that same period has been 2% a year. So we are growing, ham radio is growing at a rate twice the rate of growth of the national population. So we reckon that in Ontario, we're probably going to run out of the VE and VA call signs in about 15 years at the current rates of growth. In British Columbia and Quebec, it'll be about 20 years. So what we're proposing is that while the VB prefix is designated as an alternative special prefix for the VAs in our scheme, that when we reach that point where we are running out of the VA and the VE call signs, that the VB and the VF prefixes be withdrawn from the special prefix policy, and then be made, the VB prefix be made available as a regular issue call sign prefix. And that VF would be the single alternative special prefix for people holding a VB call sign. So basically in the VA and VE call areas, a third prefix would be added, and there would only be one special prefix alternative in those call sign areas. So we're seeing the VB prefix as kind of a strategic reserve for the future growth of amateur radio. Any questions, comments about this? Okay. Now, we have an interesting situation with special event call signs. We've had a couple of interesting occasions where the policy has been too rigid to allow a sensible use of a call sign. So a special event call sign would be a one-off individual call sign that's issued to mark a particular event. So one good recent example was in 2017, Canada marked the centennial of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, a very important battle in Canadian history. So there were a group of radio amateurs in British Columbia who came up with the idea of getting a special call sign that would be used as part of a cross-Canada celebration. And they applied for the call sign VE100 Vimy. Now, the way the current call sign policy works is if you apply for a particular call sign, the first numeral in the call sign has to agree with the prefix area of the province or territory where you live. So the guys from BC, with this really good idea, went to ISED and said, we'd like to get the call sign VE100 Vimy for this special event. It's a really important event in Canadian history. And the ISED people looked at their policy and said, well, you're in British Columbia. The first numeral can't be a 1, it has to be a 7. So they had to go through all sorts of jigs and reels, and they eventually found somebody in Nova Scotia who was willing to make the application on their behalf for the call sign. The call sign was used completely legitimately in every province and territory of the country. It was one of these things where the rules were written without clear thought. The rules were written to try and capture something that wasn't really a problem. Another example, just 2 years ago, there was a group at the Hamilton, Ontario Warplane Museum who wanted to get a special call sign to mark the 80th anniversary of the Lancaster bomber, a very important warplane in Canada's aviation history. So there was a group in Britain who were doing the same thing, a group in Australia doing the same thing. In Britain, they got the special call sign, a special event call sign, GB80LAN. In Australia, they got the special event call sign, VK80LAN. So the guys from Hamilton went to ISED and said, can we please have VE80LAN? And the people from ISED looked at their policy and they said, you're in Ontario, VE8 is Northwest Territories. We'll tell you what we'll do is we'll give you VE380LAN. How would that go? And it just didn't go. It was a dumb response bound by policy. So what they did is they found an amateur in Yellowknife who made the application on their behalf. They had the call sign authorized, VE80LAN, and they operated happily with that, and everybody was happy. They were able to participate on an equal basis in the special event. But it's because the policy was written without clear thought that they had to go through these silly jigs and reels in order to obtain a call sign that was sensible for their purpose. So what we're proposing is that from here on in, when we're authorizing special event call signs, these are like one-off individual call signs, that they use the VD and the VX prefixes exclusively, no other prefixes. That the call sign has to be, VD or VX followed by a numeral. The numeral will have no geographic significance to allow for the anniversary to represent it as part of the numeral. And that, of course, in keeping with ITU regulations, that the characters that follow that first numeral have to be either letters or numbers, and the last character has to be a letter. So we chose sort of an arbitrary minimum of 4-character type call signs, an arbitrary maximum of 11-character type call signs, based on an echo of something else, so that if our policy is implemented, the shortest possible call sign would be something like Victor Delta 0 Alpha. The longest possible call sign would be Victor X-ray 2023 Romeo India Charlie 9 uniform, for an example. It's just a bizarre example that I imagined myself. But so the shortest call sign would be 4 characters, the longest call sign would be 11. You'd be free to use any combination of numerals and letters you want. That first numeral would not have geographic significance, and this would allow for the appropriate kind of flexibility to be able to, in the case of VE100 Vimy, to be able to represent the particular anniversary or the particular event in a way that made sense. And just like with special prefixes, we're proposing that for special event station call signs, that the maximum duration be 12 months or the duration of the event being celebrated, whichever is less. So anybody have any questions, comments about this? Okay. Now, in 2022, RAC made a proposal for a new entry-level certificate. Because let's face it, I mean, the current basic exam is a pretty stiff exam. It's a tough exam. Compared to the entry-level exams in most other countries, the Canadian basic exam is a somewhat daunting exam. 100 questions, 100 different topic areas, a stiff pass mark of 70%. It's not easy. And it may be a slight inhibition on our growth, although we're doing pretty well for growth. So RAC came up with a proposal for an entry-level certificate that would be like a learner's permit entry into amateur radio. It would be 3 years, non-renewable. You would have limited frequency and power privileges with this certificate. And we also propose that there be distinctive call signs. So it's the distinctive call signs aspect that's relevant to this particular discussion. So what we're proposing is that the Victor Alpha 0 block of call signs, VA0 followed by 3 letters, be the call sign used to distinctly identify these new proposed entry-level amateurs. So VA0 followed by 3 letters, that these call signs would be issued in strict alphabetical order, so people wouldn't have choice of suffix. That the numeral would have no geographic significance. So you could have VA0AAA in St. John's, VA0AAB in Victoria, VA0AAC in Yellowknife, and anybody could be anywhere. The idea here is that on expiry, the call sign would become available for reissue to any newly certified entry-level certificate holder. And the idea here is that we want to provide incentives for people to carry on in amateur radio. So earn your learner's permit entry-level certificate. One of the things you'll get is a call sign that's in this standardized format. You won't have any discretion over the suffix. And if you want a discretionary suffix, or if you want a prefix that indicates your call area, you have to upgrade to at least basic. So we want to provide inducements for people to carry on in amateur radio, and we all know call signs are an important part of identity for us. So anybody have any questions, comments about this?
I do. What frequencies and power limits would there be?
That's the last I recall. The way that the proposal went was that it was going to be VHF and UHF only. Maximum power level of 50 watts. Yeah. Now,
Okay.
we may be years away from this being implemented. There's significant regulatory change that has to happen. And so far, ISED has indicated very little appetite for doing this, although they're coming around to the idea slowly. So I don't think you have to worry about there being VA zeros showing up on the local repeater anytime too soon.
Okay, thanks.
I would encourage maybe a 5-year time frame for that.
All right. Thank you, Charles.
A question, Dave, about
Yes,
comparison to other countries who have successfully done this. I think Australia and Great Britain are the two closest examples.
Yeah.
How deep a question group would be required for showing the knowledge that the candidate has?
Okay. Well, I'll give you an example. If I do know, I'm familiar with the British Foundation and the Australian Foundation license exams. In fact, I've taken the British Foundation exam, and the way it works is you have to. It's a 26 question exam, multiple choice, and you have to have pass mark is 76%, which I think it means you have to get at least 19 of the 26 correct. So it's a relatively small exam. The U.S. technician class license is an analogous kind of exam, and it is similarly small in scope. It has a relatively small number of questions. The pass mark is around 65 or 70%. I've forgotten the exact numbers. So it's somewhat similar. Now, what we're proposing with this entry level certificate is that what we would do is we would take a subset of the existing basic exam, not the whole of the basic exam, just a subset of it, particularly those sections related to regulations, related to operating procedures, relating to safety, and relating to interference. So that subset is about 30 or 35 questions, and we'd have a pass mark that would be in the realm of what we currently require, which is 70%.
Okay.
That was the concept. This is by way of information. I have to admit, it's been a little while since I've looked at this, so I may be missing some of the key functions of it. But really, my purpose in raising this today was to describe how it fits into our call sign policy proposal.
I'm really in favor of that level of questions, and I hope it succeeds and is adopted.
All right, thank you, Art. The next thing that we've proposed in our proposal to ISED was that there be a section added by way of information. So one of the things that's been a part of amateur radio for a long time is we like to do portable operations. We like to go around the country. We go different places and operate, and we will often modify our call signs to reflect that. So, if you take a trip down to Nova Scotia, you're likely to sign, V9 ABC stroke 1. And what we'd like to do is, this is not a requirement, however. It has not been a regulatory requirement to sign portable for over 40 years. It's just a very good practice, and it's a practice we want to encourage. So what we'd like to do is to have something outlined in the text of RIC-1 outlining what are acceptable modifications to make to one's call sign. So stroke P suffix is commonly used, stroke M for mobile, stroke MM for marine mobile, and so on. There are a whole bunch of these things that we do that are good amateur practice. We just like to have this policy document say to people, this is one of the acceptable ways of modifying your call sign in that circumstance. So it's not a requirement. What we're doing is spelling out acceptable ways, and that I think having the regulator say this is an acceptable way of modifying your call sign is, in fact, a subtle encouragement to good amateur practice. Questions, comments about this?
There's a large number of people on the nets that sign portable when in fact they're just using a handheld radio and they're at home.
Right.
Yeah, but obviously that's wrong procedure.
It is, and that's one of the things that's I like to remind us all is that the amateur radio exams are tests of a great deal of different kinds of knowledge, but they aren't intelligence tests.
There's a question from Don. Go ahead.
Yes, Don, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Now, scenario: if I was in Nova Scotia, operating at a house with a radio system that I brought, antenna and transceiver,
Yeah.
Would my call then be VE9ZP stroke VE1 portable, or just VE1?
Stroke VE1. I think we're talking here about good amateur practice. You're not required to say your portable VE1 or even portable 1, but it would be good amateur practice just to say V9ZP stroke 1 or stroke VE1. So having the extra portable at the end of it is just superfluous, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So there should be some indication that you're not within a 50-mile radius of your home QTH if you're operating with your current call sign. That doesn't seem to be covered here.
It never was. Hasn't been for over 40 years.
I could go to BC and sign VE9 CD.
It's been that way for over 40 years, Jerry.
I didn't know that.
We have not been required to sign portable since about 1982. It's a really good idea, but it's never been a requirement. It's a little rude not to, frankly. It's good amateur practice to sign portable to indicate clearly where you are.
I just normally assumed that we would, and I would, but it doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
I've got one, Dave.
Yes, Brent.
I was recently in Greece, and so my call sign was Sierra Victor 5 / Victor Echo 9 Echo X-ray /P was the requirement in Greece. So, if we have visitors to our country, what might they do?
Well, again, every country will set its own rules on this. The way that, now, I think you probably operate under the authority of the CEPT license. Is that right, Brett?
Yes.
It's not actually explicitly required to sign the extra stroke P at the end of your call sign. If you take a careful read of the CEPT license, that's not a requirement. What is a requirement is that you sign the SV5 stroke in front of your call sign. So what you did there was you employed a practice that's very commonly done in Europe, but not strictly speaking, not necessary.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments on this? And I think the fact that we've had this kind of discussion, maybe that illustrates how valuable it might be to have some kind of explicit statement about what is good practice and what is an acceptable practice, especially from the regulator's point of view.
Well, it's interesting that you cannot apply for, let's say, an ARRL certificate by using your call sign outside of a 50-mile radius of your home. So it seems to me that's important.
Well, actually, that's just an award that ARRL sponsors. The ARRL is not a regulatory agency. And I think you'll find when it comes to things like DXCC, that doesn't apply anymore. That hasn't applied for decades. So if you spent part of your life in Newfoundland, as you did, Jerry, and part of your life in New Brunswick, as you did, and part of your life in British Columbia, you can accumulate all of those countries that you've worked from all the different parts of Canada as part of your DXCC score.
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was still the 50-mile radius.
Yep.
Okay, good to know.
And that's never been regulatory. That was always a policy for ARRL's award. Now, there is a vestige of that award when it comes to VUCC, the VHF UHF Century Club, where I think you have to be within 100 kilometers of one central point in order for it to count for a single VUCC accreditation. But that's an award scheme, and ARRL they can freely add whatever kind of embellishments they want to their awards. If they want to make certain categories of award open to people only left-handed or people who have four thumbs, that's their perfect right to do so. It has nothing to do with regulations. It has nothing to do with what we have to do officially.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Okay, now we are proposing a way of trying to alleviate, in fact, to end the current shortage of two-letter call signs in some areas. And we're also trying to come up with a scheme that would allow us to have people to have portable call signs for those people who move in the course of their lives for whatever reasons. Now, of course, the V prefixes are the VA, VO, VE, VY. These are the ones we've long associated with Canadian amateur radio. However, Canada has a number of other prefixes allocated to it. So what we're proposing is to allow the C and the X prefixes allocated to Canada, so CF, CG, CH, you see them up there on the screen, for there be new series of call signs authorized in a 2x2 format. So two-letter prefix followed by a numeral followed by a two-letter suffix. These would be available to individuals, so you'd only be able to hold one two-letter call sign. The qualification would be that you're an advanced and that you've been at least 10 years as a Canadian amateur. The numeral would have no geographic significance. That would allow one to move with their call sign as they went through the course of their life. As they move from one province or territory to another, they would be able to keep the same call sign. They would not have to exchange their identity every time. We would set aside the CY9 and CY0 prefixes for St. Paul and Sable, and exclusively for people in Newfoundland and Labrador, we would allow two-letter call signs with the VO7, 8, 9, and 0 prefixes on an odd-even basis between the island of Newfoundland for the odds and the coastal Labrador for the evens. So this is novel. This is a little revolutionary because what we're doing is taking the C and the X calls, and because they are aberrant, because they are different from the norm, we would not tie them to the same geographic restriction of the numeral. And again, would allow the portability of a call sign for people to take a call sign with them when they move, if they choose to do so. We have a similar proposal for one-letter call signs. Basically, it would be issued on the same basis. You could hold one-letter suffixed call sign using either the C or the X prefixes. And again, they'd be available to individuals only, maximum one per person. The additional qualification here would be not just advanced, not just 10 years as an amateur, but also you must have passed the Morse code test in order to have this particular shorter call sign. Again, the numeral would have no geographic significance. You could move and keep your call sign. We'd still keep the CY9 and 0 as reserved for St. Paul and Sable. And we'd have two one-letter call signs authorized in Newfoundland and Labrador for people who maintain a continuous address in that province. And similarly for Yukon, Nunavut, and Prince Edward Island, we'd make one-letter call signs available there. So again, the idea here is that these prefixes are, for the most part, aberrant. We're also recognizing this sort of special historical and specificity of Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nunavut, Yukon, and Prince Edward Island. Those unusual call areas. We're going to provide an echo of those call areas. So conceivably, let's say if you could live anywhere in the country and have one of the C or X 2x1s or 2x2s and take it with you wherever you went. If you got one of the 1x1s or one of the 2x2s with these unusual prefixes for Newfoundland and Labrador, or for Nunavut, Nunavut North Territories, or Nunavut and Yukon and Prince Edward Island, you'd have to maintain an address in that particular place to retain that call sign. So what we're trying to do here is find a balance to allow the mobility for those people whose careers or lives require them to be mobile, and while still respecting the specificity and the historic nature of some particular prefixes in Canada. So these two concepts, the new one-letter call signs and the new two-letter call signs, they really go hand in hand. The only real difference between the two is the additional requirement to have the Morse qualification, to have a one-letter call sign. Anybody have any questions, comments about this?
Yes, Dave.
Joe.
I was wondering why the Morse code would be needed.
Well, the idea here is we want to try and find a way of providing an incentive for people to acquire all the possible qualifications. Right now, there are 3 Canadian exams, right? There's the basic exam, there's the advanced exam, and there's the Morse exam. And our idea here is that if you have achieved all 3 qualifications, that would give you access to these particularly shorter call signs.
Yes, but you actually don't need your Morse code now to be able to get a license.
You're right, that's true. That, notwithstanding that, I give Morse code exams all the time. I have people getting Morse qualification because they want it for status reasons, just to say they have it on the wall. To there's a whole variety of motivations for people to want to have their Morse qualification.
Okay, well, those who want the Morse code, but they could take the Morse code, but those who don't want it, for whatever reason, they should have a choice.
Well, they do have a choice. Again, what we're proposing here is if you have a certain degree of qualification and experience, you can obtain one of these call signs if you want it. There's no compulsion here. Nobody's required to get one of these call signs. It's an option. And if this option interests you, you might want to pursue learning the Morse code if you really want to get this short format call sign. If it doesn't matter to you, you won't pursue it. For many people, they probably won't pursue any of these C or X calls.
Okay.
Joe, you can get one anytime you want. You're qualified.
I could. So could you. So could Brent. So could a whole bunch of us, if you want. Well, Brent's not quite at the 10-year point yet, are you? I guess you are.
Oh, yeah, I just a 13-year point. I noticed the time. You've got a limit in 12 minutes, right?
Actually,
you want to go earlier.
I got about another. I can go until about 25 past.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're almost done, I think. Yeah.
So yes, I'm very near the end. So here, all these letters serve to summarize the proposal. So here's the way we're planning. What we're suggesting here is for the C calls and the X calls. So the C calls appear up in the upper left. The X calls appear in the bottom right. These would be available to individuals only who either have their advanced and have been hams for 10 years, 1 or 2 letter suffix call signs only, depending on whether or not you have the Morse qualification. Again, this is an option available to you. These would be available to be issued to you anywhere in Canada, and you'll be able to transport them with you as you move. For the traditional call areas, for the VAs, the VEs, the VOs, the VYs, it'd still be a requirement for you for your address to be consistent with the prefix of the call sign. So if you want a VE9 call sign, you have to have your address in New Brunswick. If you want a V6 call sign, you have to have your address in Alberta. We're proposing to set aside particular prefixes for special event stations and special event stations only, and to bring the format of those call signs in line with ITU regulations. We're proposing some special considerations for the VO and the VY call areas to recognize the historical and geographic specificity of those regions of the country. So it's quite comprehensive, and certainly would allow amateurs to have access to all of the potential Canadian prefixes, and keeping in mind that the format of an amateur radio call sign is unique to the amateur radio service. There's only one other service that has very few licenses that has a call sign format similar to the amateur service, and that's the experimental service, where they have VX9 call signs, followed by 2 or 3 letters. So again, what we're trying to do is make the best use of this resource for Canadian amateurs. So if this is implemented by ISED as we've proposed, we would protect the current call areas. And what would happen by default is any new amateur would, depending where they were in the country, they would be issued a VE, VA, VO, or VY call sign consistent with their call area, consistent with the province or territory in which they live. And that would be their default call sign. It's only after they've passed their advanced and they've been a ham for 10 years that they would be able to opt for one of these C or X calls. So we'd expand the use of all Canadian prefixes rather than the current system, which is a poorly allocated resource. We'd make fuller use of those historically significant VO prefixes. We'd reinforce the special character of the VO and the VY call areas. We'd reinforce the exclusivity of the CY9 and CY0 prefixes for St. Paul Island and Sable Island. We would allow for the mobility of call signs for those who move. And one of the things I'd like to point out, what ISED's attitude in this, ISED takes the view that a call sign is like a SIN number. It identifies an individual. There is no administrative reason for ISED now to maintain call areas. They only maintain call areas because we RAC have told them that Canadian amateurs want to maintain call areas. They serve no regulatory purpose whatsoever. We are the only radio service that has call areas, the only one. So ISED doesn't care. They do it because we want them to do it. We would permanently eliminate the shortage of two-letter call signs. That's engendered some really bad behavior in some parts of the country. I can tell a couple of stories. We can respond to a significant demand, a minority demand, but a significant minority demand for one-letter suffix call signs. We'd make an easier translation of special prefixes to regular call signs. We'd provide incentives for amateurs to upgrade their skills, knowledge, and qualifications. It may be an incentive for some, it might not be an incentive for others, and that's fine. We'd bring our practices better in line with the ITU regulations and practices in many other countries. And we'd provide a policy that probably would not require revision for decades, if ever. And perhaps the most important thing, we're not going to take anything away from anyone here. We want to come up with a better way of using this resource and that uses it in a more flexible manner that responds better to the contemporary needs of Canadian amateurs. So anybody have any other questions, comments, accusations?
Regarding the last item, take away nothing from anyone.
Yeah.
That's presuming people maintain their connection with ISED and keep their registration up to date.
That's right. That's your obligation.
Okay. That should be put in there, Dave.
Yeah.
Should be noted. Put in where?
On this proposal, there should be something at the very end saying, presuming you maintain your registration.
I think that's very clearly written in our proposal, Jerry.
Yeah, but not on this sheet, if you're going to do this.
Oh, you want this particular slide to be...
I'll annotate the video. Sure.
So should I have sent my slideshows to you for your...
You should have, and then I would have approved it on.
I will annotate the video. I'll put it on, Jerry.
Okay.
Joe, did you have a question?
Yes. If we have to if we have to advise ISED every 2 years or so, I was wondering if it could not work both ways, that ISED could send us a notice that our call sign is on the verge of being gone, and of course, especially we seniors who sometimes forget. I think it would be wise that ISED would either send us a letter or email or whatever to let us know.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. That's great. I'm in the same category.
I think you touched on a good point, Joe, and you're right. I think there is going to be a certain... there are going to be people who want to maintain their call signs but may not be able to maintain adequate records. And I I get the point, and that may be something that ISED decide that they feel obliged to do. Because right now, see, what we have really is a situation where a previous generation of ISED officers came up with this cockamamie policy that we have call signs until our 125th birthday, and it is a cockamamie policy. They just kick the can down the road. There's no excuse for it. I think they're embarrassed by it. But now, to some degree, they're committed to that. So how do they untie this knot that they created for themselves? And it may be that they would have to go through some process of alerting people before they yank it. Now, one thing I have heard from ISED recently is they've considered sending out letters to those radio amateurs who are above the age of 100, just to confirm whether or not they're still there. However, as they've gone through this process of thinking this through, they've wondered, are we being ageist by only writing to people over the age of 100? So it can be very tangly to do this stuff. Anyway, Brent, do you have a comment?
Yeah, if a lot of this policy goes forward, would RAC be the one that would administer some sort of lottery system to help assign call signs randomly?
Well, we probably do it on the basis of choice, and we have made the offer to ISED that we can provide some of the IT resources to help implement this. One of the biggest problems that ISED faces right now is a lack of IT resources, and actually, this is a big problem across the whole of the federal government. Holding on to a trained quality IT staff is very difficult, and it's sometimes, if they have a major project, they put in their bid and they might get IT resources for it 2 years down the road. Maybe. It's a big challenge for them right now. So RAC might be able to provide the tools that can be used to handle this. And what we might do is, what I've suggested to them, just a suggestion, was that RAC could be an intermediary where we would run a kind of as fair and balanced a lottery system as possible to allow people to make their choices, and then provide a recommendation to ISED that perhaps ISED could implement. So let's say Jerry decides he wants to become CF5Q. He would apply for us because he's qualified. He's been a ham for over 10 years. He's got his advanced. He's passed the Morse code test. He asks for CF5Q, and we could, if he's the first person to ask for CF5Q, we could make a recommendation to ISED that they issue CF5Q to Jerry. That's one possible scenario. ISED has not committed to anything. They're actually remarkably Sphinx-like in that they don't commit to anything until maybe well after they've actually implemented it. So it's kind of funny. There's a bit of shadow boxing going on in any interaction with ISED, because they don't want to make a commitment that they can't fulfill, and say that one of the biggest challenges for them is IT resources. They just can't get the qualified informatics people.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Are there other questions?
It's Art, Dave. I almost hesitate after what you've said about IT resources offering the idea, but Revenue Canada has I suggest, very well established death notice that could be automatically fed into this system for that category of operator no longer taking an interest.
That's very possible. That's an interesting idea, I should say. I'm not sure how possible it is. One of the issues that's a big problem for ISED and other government departments is the Privacy Act. The information that's collected by Revenue Canada is solely for the purposes of Revenue Canada's collection. It's only under really exceptional circumstances that information gets shared across, where it's allowed by law or by court decisions and that sort of thing. So I think I have my doubts about whether ISED would be able to get access to that kind of information. But
I accept that idea, and I only offered it for completion of what was on my mind. Thanks, Dave.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks. And I want to jump in. Thanks. We're just over the 15-minute mark, and I think we've had much more questions here than most seminars and presentations we have, so it shows the interest here, Dave. Thank you very much for your time to do this. I actually want to limit questions mainly because you have to take off and we have a meeting. So I want to thank everybody for being here, the questions, and thank you very much, Dave, for presenting this, and we'll hope to edit the video and get it out at some point in time.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks, Dave.
And
okay,
I'd like
thank
to
you.
thank you all for your support of RAC. It's really important. This is one of the strongest RAC supporting clubs in the entire country. You should be very proud of yourselves for that. So please maintain your memberships in RAC. It's essential to the future of of this hobby.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Thanks. Good night, all.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.